Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Well, currently we've got some hot weather, and this is going to make the tomatoes and the sweet corn and the squash and pumpkins and my watermelon are all going to love this heat.
I have to remind myself of that while I'm out there sweating, trying to put in a garden fence and staying on top of my weeds, that it's tough for me, but it's good for a lot of the plants are really going to like it, especially the vegetables.
Yeah, it is. And if you put yourself in the right frame of mind, yeah, I've been hot and sweaty when I've been out weeding, and I just kind of embrace it. You know, I kind of embrace the uncomfortableness to me.
Oh, you are a special man.
But knowing that my watermelons need this heat, you know. But it's interesting, you know, when we talk about the heat in the middle of summer here, there is an upper threshold that plants would rather not cross. And that's about 90 degrees, you know, up until 90 degrees. Heat-loving plants love it, but above 90, then they don't like it so much. So let's hope for a good, moderate 80 degrees, inch of rain per week, and we'll be in good shape.
Well, you know, something I do to take a break from gardening, Sam, my girlfriend, and I, every day we play a couple of the New York Times has a bunch of puzzles on apps, and one of them is called Strands. And
I've never tried it.
It looks like a bunch of letters on a board, and you try to make sense and try to find words in them, so it's kind of like a crossword in a way, but it's on a theme. And we were playing the other day, and the theme was trellis beauties and things like clematis, just a lot of moonflowers, different things like that. And so we're going to talk today about kind of climbers, about some of the kind of climbers. So people who are New York Times puzzle players saw this the other day. We're going to bring it right into the show today.
Well, they must have been listening to you, because as we were planning this episode, they must have heard our discussion or sensed our discussion. So a good discussion on vines.
Yeah. But before that, you've got a letter. Somebody wrote you with a question.
Jason wrote in, I planted a firelight hydrangea last month, and the leaves have some brown dry areas. Is this a disease, and what should I do? Well, thanks, Jason, for writing and for listening. Also, thanks for sending in the photo, because when I looked at the photo, and you can tell it's a young hydrangea, firelight is the panicle type, nice kind of deep pink type blossoms, well adapted, winter hardy, well adapted to our area. So good choice, Jason. But when I look closely, and of course the leaves do have some brown kind of dry areas on that, but when I look closely, it was planted in soil that looked fairly heavy clay. And I could see the soil. There was no mulch or anything around it. So the hydrangea does not have a disease as such. There's not a blight causing those areas. Instead, I think the hydrangea is reacting to the soil. Hydrangea like a very organic type soil, lots of peat moss, lots of compost things mixed in. And so if it was just planted in a clay type soil, I think it's resenting that a little bit. And also a hydrangea that was planted this year is really new. It doesn't have the root system to really get itself established and going yet. So I think it developed those kind of brown areas of leaves kind of in response to the stress it's had. So here's what I would do. I wouldn't totally dig it up, but I would incorporate some good peat moss in around it. You know, maybe try to work it down into the upper 3 inches or so without disturbing the roots too much, but get some good peat moss in. That'll help conserve moisture. It'll get the soil more organic. It'll be more friendly to hydrangea. And then over the top of that, shredded bark mulch, about 5 inches. That will keep the soil cooler. It won't bake so hard, and it'll conserve the moisture, because the word hydrangea itself means water loving. And so a good mulch will help give it the water it needs, and also water hydrangeas more often than you would other type of shrubs as well. They really love that. So I think with those things in mind, I think your hydrangea is going to thrive. The brown areas on the leaves are not going to be terminal. Also, hydrangea take, 3 or 4 years to really get cranked up and growing. So it tests our patience a little bit, but keep going with it, and that hydrangea is going to provide great beauty.
Should we be a little cautious about planting if it's super, super hot here in mid-July or so? If it's above 90 degrees, should we hold off on planting?
Yeah, and if it's something, if you couldn't resist a sale at the garden center.
Right.
Yeah,
Hard to.
Yep, definitely. And so choose the evenings, of course. Plant in the evenings, water it in really, really well. Mulch the soil so that the soil doesn't bake. Black soil, dark soil absorbs a lot of heat, and so to keep the roots cooler and less intense, mulch is one of the greatest things that we can do. And with those things, success can be had planting even in midsummer. But we need to be a little more cautious and kinder to the plants that we just planted.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the climbing plants that we wanted to get to this week. Where do you go with this? What's your take on climbing plants?
Oh gosh, vines are so fun because you can get a lot of mileage without a huge space horizontally. Growing upward, of course, the nature of the vines.
Not a lot of groundwork.
Yeah, not a lot of ground, and yet you have this beauty that it can extend many, many feet up. So I've enjoyed one of the vines we'll talk about in more detail is wisteria. Now, you think of wisteria as a southern vine that's hanging down. You see the pictures, the blue panicles of flowers hanging down out of the big trees and et cetera. Well, there's actually a winter hardy one, so I'm enjoying that. And also, we've got some roses that act as climbers, and I'm enjoying those as well. Do you have any vines on your home?
You know what we've got? We've got Virginia creeper. And I think
we're going to talk about that.
We're kind of torn as a household on that, whether to keep it or whether to try to get it out. It does creep pretty quick.
It does.
And it does go up. So yeah,
let's get into them.
Yeah, let's start with Virginia creeper. That's something that we inherited with the house, and I think it was grown because somebody put it in there because it was they do climb nice, and actually in the fall the leaves change color.
Oh, they get a vibrant scarlet color.
Yeah, they're really nice. But we've found that they were kind of they were climbing up into the arborvitae tree. They climb up alongside the house, then go up along the drain pipe, and they've actually started climbing on one of the old phone lines that we still have. So things like that. But in a way, I kind of want to train it to keep it on the fence because I think that would be kind of a nice backdrop.
Yeah, because they can grow to 50 feet, and it doesn't take long to get up to that 50 feet. So Virginia creeper is the vine. It's got a good dark green leaf. The leaf shape is described as palmate, like the palm of your hand, and the fingers are the leaflets, kind of big, fatter than a finger, but they have those kind of 5 leaflets, all kind of palm-shaped like, and so that's a good way to identify it. And of course, it will not climb up brick. In a minute, we'll talk about its close relative that will climb up brick. So Virginia creeper needs something to climb onto. It loves going up a tree. A telephone pole, even like you mentioned, and so it can strangle other plants. So like when it gets into an arborvitae, in time it could totally cover that arborvitae and exclude the sunlight from it. So when you purchase a Virginia creeper, the tag says vigorous. And that it is.
And invasive,
but
probably.
Now, in the right place, it's awesome. As when I was growing up as a boy in Lisbon, we had a wire fence that separated us from our neighbors. And on that wire fence, we had Virginia creeper growing. And so it made a living fence. It was just like a hedge, a good privacy screen. I suppose it was maybe 5.5 feet tall. And it spread horizontally along that fence, totally covering the fence so that you could not see through it from the ground level on up. We did have to trim it, almost like you would a hedge. We had to trim it about once or twice a growing season just to keep it in bounds. Because, of course, if the fence was 5.5 feet tall, it wants to go much higher than that, and so it would kind of arch over. So when it would reach the 5-foot height, we would just go along and trim the vining ends to keep it at that 5.5 feet, almost like you would a shrub type hedge as you trim it to keep it where you want it. But it made just a beautiful, so it was only kind of the width of the fence, didn't take up much space, but vertically it gave excellent screening. So I could see this on a chain link fence. Again, it's going to require some maintenance. Otherwise, it will find its way where you don't want it. And, on a house, it has no problem going up along the eave trough and getting up on the roof and heading on up over the shingles. It has no problem with that.
And they do well in the shade too, don't they?
They do. Yes.
It is one of the things that both of ours are, they don't get a lot of direct sunlight. So they can exist.
Yeah,
there.
I'd enjoy hearing your discussion with you and your girlfriend as to, how are you going to manage that Virginia creeper?
What is the best way let's start with this too. What is the best way to train vines?
Oh, like on the, of course, logically you plant them at the base of whatever you want them to climb up on. And depending on the type of vine, you may need one, you may need more, depending on the width that you want them to cover. For example, Virginia creeper, since it can go 50 feet, you only need one of those, and that's going to cover quite a wide distance. When we get to the flowering vines like clematis, some of those, if you want coverage, horizontally, maybe 3 to 4 feet apart. So depending on the situation, you may need one, you may need more than one to fill up that area that you're looking to fill. Most vines like organic soil again. So when you are planting, lots of good peat moss, compost, because most of the vines would kind of like the root system cool and moist. So a good mulch around the base. And the vines, it's interesting. We humans are interesting creatures. We want a vine that's going to grow quickly. We'd like it to cover the structure quickly. But then we would like that vine to have the good sense to stop exactly at the point we would like it to stop.
Rules.
Yes, exactly. And, the vigor and stopping where we want it to aren't always compatible.
No.
So we need to have understanding on these vines.
What about, I know that sometimes that they will like a structure to climb on, like you were saying, but what if we've got a wood fence? If we wanted to train vines to go up there, should we run some yarn or twine up through it, or set up kind of a trellis, or how can you get them to climb, vertically?
Yeah, that's a good point, John, because vines have different ways of climbing up the structure. Many vines, and we'll kind of mention these, many vines will twine around. They'll have maybe little tendrils, or they'll just physically, the stems will twine around. For example, on a chain link fence, they'll kind of find their way to snake up in between the meshes and they'll raise themselves. Other times they'll have kind of wire-like tendrils that will curl around the structure and grab on. So it's important to kind of know the vine that you're getting, its means of attaching to that structure, whether it can just curl on up, or whether you're going to have to do something else. Okay, a few vines, kind of the minority, are able to climb up structures with no wire, no chain fencing, no mesh. And so actually the next one that we talk about, Engelmann ivy, has this ability. So let's talk about that one.
Yeah.
Engelmann ivy looks a lot like Virginia creeper. The leaves look similar, those big palmate, hand-shaped formation of leaflets. Looks just identical in leaf, but there's a difference. Its means of attaching to a structure, it has little wire-like tendrils, but on the end of each of those tendrils are little suction cups.
Okay.
So Engelmann ivy, as it's creeping or next to a structure, such as a brick house or stucco house or a wood fence, it sends out these little suction cups, and so it can crawl up a solid structure. So Engelmann ivy, and of those that we talk about, that may be about the only one that is able to self-support on a structure. the Virginia creeper that we mentioned, that's going to need a wire mesh. So most of the vines that we'll talk about need wire or something in which they can wrap themselves around rather than a solid structure. So which means, as many of the vines that we talk about, many of them, as they get going, to kind of help them along their way, help them to kind of wrap around the wire fencing or the mesh. Oftentimes we'll need to put some twistums or something to get them started. And once that they're faced in the right direction, sometimes I'll even, like with the clematis, kind of the new growth, I'll kind of poke it behind the mesh a little bit, and then all of a sudden it almost grabs onto that. So back to the Engelmann ivy. If, as you're driving around, if you see a vine clinging to a brick house or stucco house, it's usually Engelmann ivy. And it's interesting, sometimes when those houses have to be painted and you have to take off the vines, you can see the little imprints, not really an imprint, but a little discoloration where that little tiny suction cup. They're maybe about the size of a pinhead, not much bigger, a little bigger maybe. And but that allows them to do the halls of ivy, the campus halls of ivy. And so interesting.
My neighbor's got one in the fall. It's just a beautiful, beautiful red. It's just vibrant. It's so nice to see.
Yeah, it's fun to see brick or stucco homes with those climbing up. And sometimes they've carved out the areas in the window, because Engelmann ivy is about as vigorous as Virginia creeper. And it's kind of neat where they've pruned the vine, to go around the windows. And there's something about a vine-covered home. And that's got to keep them cooler, too, I would think.
Is that something that people should be considerate of? If, maybe grow it, if you want something up the side of your house, maybe grow it at a place where you don't have outlets, exterior outlets, or utility boxes or things like that you may need access to, or windows, because the ivy or Virginia creeper or whatever would grow all over it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a good consideration too. And on some of the modern siding, I'm not sure how Engelmann ivy. See, when Engelmann ivy, when it holds fast with these little suction cups, they're called holdfasts, and when that vine is pulled off, it does leave a little marking that's even hard with a wire brush to get off. So I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to hear from somebody if they've tried Engelmann ivy on like steel or aluminum siding, and have they been happy, and have they been compatible? So another close relative of the Engelmann ivy that we don't see too often, but there's a good example in Fargo, and that's Boston ivy. Boston ivy is in the same genus, Parthenocissus, as Engelmann ivy and Virginia creeper. Boston ivy has a little smaller leaf, a little finer texture leaf. It has the holdfast suction cups. The best example used to be a funeral home in Fargo here. Now I believe it's apartments. The Ivers building in old downtown area of Fargo.
Great brick building.
Yeah, and a lot of senior high school photos are taken in front of that building, because a beautiful brick building with this gorgeous Boston ivy crawling up it. And Boston ivy is less winter hardy. Well, maybe that's where the name comes from, Boston. They're a hardiness zone or two warmer than we are. And so Boston ivy, it will grow and survive in this area. That's been on the Ivers building for a long, long time. Once we tried to determine once how long that had been there, and it's been there a long, long time, maybe close to even 100 years. But anyway, so Boston ivy will tend to freeze back in very severe winters, but that's okay. It doesn't seem to totally kill out. On the Ivers building, I noticed in severe winters, sometimes the upper part will die, and then that needs to be taken off, and then, of course, then it regrows. So Boston ivy, kind of a little bit finer version of the Engelmann ivy. Then the next one has an interesting name, Dutchman's pipe. Dutchman's pipe. I've probably only seen one or two examples of this in Fargo over the years. The reason it got its name Dutchman's pipe is it does produce a little flower. They're not showy flower. It's a greenish brown little flower. You'd have to look close to even notice them. But they're shaped in the form of a meerschaum pipe, the kind of like a leprechaun might, or an Irish leprechaun oftentimes is pictured with those meerschaum pipes, and the flower is like that. So that's where the Dutchman's pipe. Well, I guess that's not Irish, but the Dutch, I guess.
Oh, right. Yeah. European.
Yeah, right. And so anyway, Dutchman's pipe can freeze back, but occasionally you'll encounter that too. So I wanted to include that as well. Now, the next vine that we talk about is an interesting one, American bittersweet. That's used a lot, like in wreaths and things.
Floral arrangements?
Yeah, floral arrangements, because it produces the nice, bright orangish red berries.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of people scout around for that in the fall of the year.
People go out in the wild, and when they find a spot, boy, they do not tell you.
Oh, no.
They do not share their fishing hole there.
That's a closely held secret.
It is.
That's for sure. And now the bittersweet's an interesting vine. There are male vines and female vines, and so in order to get them to produce the berries, you needed one of each. Okay, so in the wild, of course, obviously there's enough of them, males and females, that you get production. But in the home yard, if you want them to produce berries, you used to have two different vines. Well, they're vigorous, so you didn't really need to. And the male vines didn't produce the berries, just the female one did. But breeders discovered one, a bittersweet, that had both male and female flowers on the same plant. So it produced berries. So you only needed one. And it was called Autumn Revolution. Autumn from the nice bright colors and things that it gets in the fall, and revolution because this was kind of new. And so bittersweet can grow up to about 20 feet. And so for those that love bittersweet, I mean, it's a nice vine too, but for those that like the bittersweet fruits that it produces, Autumn Revolution is the one for you.
Hey, these vines that we're talking about, are these things that most of these will die back down to the ground in the fall? And if so, do they grow on their old vines? Will they regrow up them, or will they climb their old vines? Because we're talking about, when you think about vining, a lot of times you don't think about the maintenance of taking them down every year. So if they die back, are you okay leaving them up and then they will grow back and climb over?
That's a good point, because vines have two different ways of coming back. And the vines that we're currently talking about are perennial type vines that come back. But there's two ways in which a perennial vine comes back. They can come back, some varieties can come back from the old stuff that's still up on the trellis or up on the wall. Now, Virginia creeper does that. So if it's crept 50 foot up into the tree, the next year it leafs out way up above. The whole thing leafs out again. It doesn't die back to ground level. Same thing with the Engelmann ivy on a brick home. It doesn't come back from ground level each year. It leafs out from everything that's up on that structure. Now, when we get into the flowering vines like clematis, that's the type that comes back from about ground level. It doesn't normally leaf out from the old part. Yeah, so when we talk to flowering vines, we'll get into clematis. But yeah, that's a good point, because so far, all of these vines that we talked about, they leaf out from the old wood that is still on the structure or trellis.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about those flowering vines.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back. This week we're talking about vines. We're talking about growing up this year, literally. Growing up, getting some vertical attention in your garden, and with vines. Let's kind of talk about some flowering vines.
Well, one that you oftentimes see in gardening magazines or mail order magazines is the trumpet vine. Trumpet vine, large red-orange flowers, and the vine will cling to wood or masonry, but where it's a little more winter hardy, it can get up to 30 feet, pretty good size. But in our hardiness zones 3 and 4, it usually dies back in winter. So that's one that kind of comes back from ground level. And so you don't see as many trumpet vines in our area just because they lack the widespread winter hardiness.
Okay.
So, but again, we do see them in the nursery catalogs. I don't see them offered very often in the garden center.
Okay.
In the vines. The next one is fully winter hardy, the Dropmore Scarlet Honeysuckle Vine. Are you familiar with that one with kind of the orangey red flowers?
Well, I know honeysuckle, yeah. So, yeah, is this a
vining type?
The vining type of the
honeysuckle
shrub, yeah.
Dropmore Scarlet, it was developed years ago at Dropmore, Manitoba.
Oh, okay.
And so originally from Canada, it's just rock solid hardy, and it develops kind of a woody type vine. It does need support, so it would twine around a trellis or a fencing. And so because it becomes quite weighty, for example, it starts growing with a fairly massive vine in time at the base, fairly large and woody, and it produces a fairly heavy above ground structure. And so if it's a kind of a wimpy trellis or wimpy wire fence, it's probably going to try to bend the fence over. So good solid support for the Dropmore Scarlet Honeysuckle vine. And in time, they can get a little bit woody. And so some good pruning in the spring before they leaf out. And when I say good pruning, many of these vines that leaf out from the old above ground woody part, many of them benefit from a good pruning in early spring before they leaf out. For example, the Virginia creeper, sometimes just because they can become such a mass of woody vines in time, just going in and giving them a heavy pruning, prune until it hurts and then prune some more, and they'll love it. And then you get rid of some of that tangle of old wood. So Dropmore Scarlet Honeysuckle Vine is kind of like that. Every so often, maybe it's every 3, 4, 5 years, just go in and remove a good portion. Maybe you're removing 50% of the above ground material, not necessarily cutting it all the way back and making it regrow. You can do that too. But maybe just getting in and kind of thinning it out so that it doesn't become quite such a tangle of brush.
Okay. What about clematis? That's one that you see around a lot.
I love clematis. That is one of the most prolific flowering vines I think that we can do. And there are different named varieties, different colors. The Jackman clematis is it's interesting. As I'm saying that word, it comes to mind. There's different ways of producing clematis. I grew up calling it clematis. Mm-hmm. There's an alternative way of pronouncing that, clematis. Mm-hmm. And I always chuckle a little bit because I heard someone say, well, if you say clematis, it's kind of like you're putting on airs.
Right.
But if one grew up calling it clematis, well, that's a very good pronunciation as well. Okay, back to the story about Jackman clematis. That is one of the probably most prolific. That's the one with the dark blue, purplish blue flowers. And the reason it's so popular is because it flowers so very, very heavily. Now, clematis, this type of clematis, is kind of unique in that once it gets established, it grows basically from about ground level or the lower 6 inches, and it can easily reach 10 feet in that growing season, and then flowers on all this new wood. New wood meaning the vines that are produced currently. That's called new wood. And so it grows so beautifully. And then I let the clematis vine hang on over winter. It seems to winter better. It's fully winter hardy, but anything can die out in a severe winter. Mm-hmm. And so I leave the vines on all winter. And then in early spring, before any growth starts, we're talking probably April sometime, cut it off near ground level. I take it back to about 6 inches above ground level. Now, a few tips for growing clematis. One is they take at least 3 years to establish, to build their reserves. And then after 3 years, where you had kind of one plant, after 3 years, the root system and the crown has enlarged enough that you'll find just dozens of shoots all coming up from ground level. And it makes such a wide, massive growth at that point, if we treat it right. And so one clematis can easily cover a 4-foot wide trellis all the way up. So a few keys to getting it to do that. One is, patience, but also clematis have an interesting kind of a little saying about them. And that saying is that they like their face in the sun and their feet in the shade, meaning that they don't like heat-baked soil. Okay, so one way that we can do that is with a good layer of mulch. But when we plant the clematis, add plenty of good organic matter too. They like good organic matter. Organic matter helps to keep the soil and the roots cool. So again, to keep the roots, the feet in the shade, in the coolness, add organic matter at planting time. And then after planting, mulch with at least 5 inches thick. I like the shredded wood mulch, and keep them nice and moist. And not just a little bit of mulch just right on the base, but, give it maybe a good 3-foot at least circle, 3 or 4 foot circle of mulch to keep the soil cool a distance from them. Now, it's interesting. On some Facebook plant groups that I follow, people have passed along that the roots of clematis like shade. So I've noticed some people saying that they're putting a rock, a couple of rocks in front of the clematis to cast some shade. Okay. But actually, rocks kind of heat up. They're heavy. Rock mulch and clematis aren't the friendliest thing in compatibility. And so I'd skip trying to put boulders in front to cast shade, but instead some people will plant some annual flowers in front to cast a little shade. The mulch itself, the wood mulch, that's shading the roots just because it's blocking out the sun. So it's shading the roots, but you could plant something in front of the base of the clematis. If you had your preference on clematis, the exposure, east side is wonderful. That gets all the morning sun, but then at a certain point in the heat of the day, heat of the afternoon, they're in the whole thing is in the shade. So east side is wonderful. And that's where we've got ours growing. And what else about clematis? They love fertilizer. And so as soon as they begin growth in the spring, some good 10-10-10 all-purpose or Miracle Grow or other water-soluble types. And, we'd be talking gallons of that solution. So on one clematis, I'd easily put 3 to 5 gallons of solution slowly poured around. And, when we had Mary Holm on, her husband Tom has done a lot of work with flowers. And he said, with some flowering type things, if I quote him exactly here, he indicated if you want it to bloom like an elephant, you need to feed it like an elephant. And so some of these things are nutrient hungry. So clematis giving it good food. The other thing that I learned from my mom, a wonderful gardener, is, and here's a secret I'm going to share with the podcast listeners. When the clematis starts to grow, in May sometime when it starts to grow, and most of these shoots will be coming from ground level or near. So a shoot will come up. So in the center of that shoot, at the growing point, if you pinch that shoot out, pinch that tip out, where you pinch that out, 2 will arise. And so if you do that with every shoot that's popping up out of the ground with the clematis or near ground level, you automatically double the size, the width, you double the number of shoots that are coming up. And so if you give it that one pinch in May, and it's the type of thing when you look at it and you see the shoots. 1 pinch per flower. 1 pinch per a
stem.
shoot
Yes,
per
shoot,
stem.
yeah.
Yep. And then so where you pinched out that center growing point, then two arise fairly quickly where you pinched out the one. And so that's an easy way to automatically double the amount of vines that you have coming up. Let's see. What other types of things? So fertilize again in June, because clematis, this type, is typically blooming in late June, early July.
About now.
Yeah, right about now, coming into good bloom and vigor. So those tips coupled with a little patience, and you'll have a clematis that'll be with you for many, many decades.
All right, let's go over some other ones. Climbing roses, of course, big one.
Yes, climbing roses. Now, the climbing rose that's able to send its shoots through a trellis, those aren't hardy enough here. But we do have some that act like climbers. One of those is William Baffin, developed in Canada. Henry Kelsey, also developed in Canada. And Rambling Red, also developed in Canada. The Canadians have done a good job. Yeah. So anyway, those are classified as climbing roses, but they need to be attached to your trellis. And they're very winter hardy, so they'll leaf out normally from the above ground woody parts up there on your trellis. If you had an archway, that you walk through, plant one of those on each side, and then they'll kind of meet in the middle. So one on each side of the walk-through arbor, and then they'll climb up and meet in the middle. And so that's kind of a neat way to do those. So William Baffin, Henry Kelsey, Ramblin' Red are three that act, but you will have to kind of attach them twist them to your arbor or support. So that's nice. Oh, and wisteria. I mentioned wisteria a little bit. And the wonderful one that we've got and we're enjoying, Summer Cascade. There was an older one called Aunt D, and one called Blue Moon. But the newest variety, Summer Cascade, is the one that really seems to do well. It's beautiful, kind of blue hanging flowers, clusters of blue hanging flowers. So that's a good one. Again, it does need a support. So we've got it on a kind of a wooden trellis climbing up and doing beautifully. And, next, grapevines. When we talk about double duty vines, grapevines are just awesome because if you select some of those that are winter hardy for producing their fruit, you can enjoy just the nature of the vine, but also fruit. We've got a Swenson Red, developed in Minnesota, Swenson Red grape that's climbing up over the way we get into our vegetable garden. So it's climbing up over that. But just imagine an arbor, with grapevines growing up, and then you're kind of sitting, you're walking under it, and you're observing the clusters of grapevines. So check the locally owned garden centers for some of the most winter hardy Swenson Red and Edelweiss. And I believe there's one called Somerset, are pretty good table grapes. They have a little tiny seed in them, but not bad. You can kind of almost eat it and without having to spit it out. And, of course, there's some good wine grapes that are developed for our area, too, to make fine wines and jellies. And so grapevines, for decorating a chain link fence, giving a little bit of screen. And there's some good websites for how to prune grapes. Grapes do better if they are pruned each year once they get established. There's some good websites for how to prune a grapevine. And have you ever seen hops growing, a hops vine?
Yeah, those are pretty, and kind of big leaves too, right?
Yeah. And, it's interesting. NDSU has done some trials on hops varieties. And when they grow hops commercially, they actually put them up on almost big, massive, almost like telephone poles with wire stretched, because they can become pretty massive vines. And they're maybe not my top choice for a pretty vine, but there's something, they're unique. And
are they aromatic at all?
Not that I've noticed.
Okay.
I have a bucket list of things I want to grow in our own yard. I've got a long ways to go. Hops, I haven't grown it in our yard. I've seen plenty grown. I'm not sure I need to add hops to my bucket list, but kind of interesting. It would be interesting to actually grow a crop of hops. We don't brew our own beer, but it'd be kind of fun for those that do to have, kind of your own homegrown hops.
One thing that when we were talking a little earlier about wisteria kind of reminded me, jasmine. Jasmine can be a climber too. I mean, I don't think it's not a perennial up here, is it?
It's not.
No.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be nice?
It's a nice floral kind of smelling.
It's interesting. Any of these things I think would potentially, for breeders, if they got a wisteria that grows here, maybe jasmine. It'd be interesting. That'd be fun to investigate. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a winter hardy jasmine?
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, let's talk about some annual vines that maybe we'll be seeing in our vegetable gardens.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're talking vines this week, and let's talk about annual vines, like maybe some things that even you can, we're talking about the grapevines, but like what are some other vines that we can maybe get some vegetables or fruit from?
Yeah, some vines are just annual things that we'd need to plant each year. And there are lots of gardeners doing fun things with vegetables on vines. Yeah, some of the squash arches.
Yes.
I've seen some of them like in the community gardens that are grown high enough so that you walk through this tunnel and you see the squash or gourds, cucumbers. You could do the same thing. You see them hanging from that as you walk through. And that's just a neat novelty. Plus, they aren't gobbling up as much land space as they would if you just planted them and let them sprawl out on the ground. And so even if it's not a squash arch that you walk through, but even creating a trellis or a fence in your vegetable garden on which these things, peas, pole beans, or squash, cucumbers that can grow vertically. I'm growing pole beans.
Okay.
Well, right now the rabbits ate off half of them, but that's another story. But the reason I'm doing pole beans are string bean types. And, instead of crawling around on the ground or stooping over to harvest the beans, they grow up on a height that you can just pick them standing up.
Yeah.
And so I've become a fan of pole beans.
Okay.
And much easier on the back, that's for sure. And of course, when we talked about flowering vines, there's lots of good flowering vines. Morning glories.
Yep.
Now, morning glories, those beautiful blue, and there's kind of a pinkish, purplish shade to them also. Now, morning glories are true annual. They grow from seed fairly rapidly, but they also seed themselves. So once you plant morning glory seeds at along a fence, you have them coming up each year, I found. We used to have them along our garden fence at home in Lisbon. They were beautiful. And I planted them along our garden fence, and they come up each year. A couple of years ago, I decided not to have them. They're still kind of coming up from seedlings, but not obnoxiously. The reason I decided not to have them the last couple of years, I wanted to plant sweet peas.
Okay.
My mom always had sweet peas growing along a fence. And of course, they do need a fence or trellis, wire trellis type thing to climb up. And sweet peas are so fragrant. And, sweet peas, there's the edible type of pod peas, or sometimes called sweet peas. But these are the flowering sweet peas.
Okay.
And such fragrant flowers on those. So I ordered the seed They need to be planted quite early because they like cool soil. So I planted them in April, and they're doing quite well. They aren't blooming quite yet, but so sweet peas. Hyacinth bean make a pretty. Now, are you growing those in yours?
Yep. Sam grows those, and we've done a couple of.
Those are pretty.
Yeah, in fact, where we did have clematis, we were having trouble with it, so we put down hyacinth beans. And you think the thing there is that you harvest those beans, you've got more than enough for the next year to plant, but they come up this beautiful kind of deep purple.
They are beautiful.
Deep purple seed pod. They are really, really gorgeous.
Yeah, they are. They're an awesome plant. Then another one sometimes you see too the seed of is cardinal climber. They've kind of a smaller reddish blossom, kind of a finer cut leaf. They aren't as massive of a vine. If you're looking for mass in a vine, cardinal climber isn't quite as massive as some of the others. It doesn't maybe give that solid look that the hyacinth bean plant or morning glories or sweet peas will give too.
Now, I got to say one thing that we talked a little bit about how different vines will need different kind of supports, but tell us what you did for your clematis, because I think that this is ingenious.
Oh, yes. And I got this idea from my dad. Okay, they had their clematis on the east side of the house. And what he used for a trellis is a section of chain link fence turned up and down vertically.
Yep.
So he put a metal rod through the links at the bottom, metal rod through the links up at the top, and then just with some hooks, kind of some eye hooks, screwed into the siding of the house at the bottom and the top, and then you fasten it. In fact, up at the top, and so I did the same thing, up at the top, just some open kind of hooks so that I can actually I can unhook that chain link fence. So it's a chain link fence, let's see, and I believe I went 10 feet. So starting at the bottom at the base, and then I went vertically 10 feet with this chain link. So at the hardware store, you don't need to buy 50 feet of chain link fence.
Right.
You can buy shorter sections. I think maybe for dog runs and things like that. So I just bought the section that I need. Fasten it up vertically instead of horizontally, and the clematis really clings to that well.
Yeah.
It can grab on and hold to that very, very well. So another good use for a chain link fence.
Yeah.
And when fastened to the side of the house, ours is the side of our garage, it works well. And the hooks that you put in, if you fasten it so that the chain link fence stays out just a few inches from the wall, so it doesn't so it's not clinging tightly to the wall, that gives enough space behind the chain link fence for the clematis to kind of wind around and cling to the chain link fence even better.
And people can come and check this out for themselves during the Red River. Is it the Red River Valley Garden?
2 weeks, yes. Red River Valley Garden Tour. So just search that, Red River Valley Garden Tour. Make sure it's in Fargo. And I think there's only one of them. And the tickets are available. The tour is July 16th and 17th. You can go either day. It's 7 yards plus the Garden of Healing. Tickets are $15. The proceeds are going to the Garden of Healing. And sometime we need to do a podcast episode on the Garden of Healing. So this is your chance to peek into the backyards or front yards of some homes to see what everybody's got growing. My wife and Mary and our yard is on the tour this year, so we'll be in the front yard ready to greet you. I'd love to hear people say, gosh, we enjoyed hearing you on the podcast. Yeah, so that we'll visit. Then, so yes, again, July 16th and 17th, Red River Valley Garden Tour. Tickets $15. They're all going to support the nonprofit Garden of Healing.
And where do they get the tickets? Can they buy them online, or do they have to go to a store?
Online. Yep.
Okay.
Red River Valley Garden Tours. The actual website is rrvtour.com. But if you just do a Google search, Red River Valley Garden Tour, that'll take you to the website. The ticket purchase is right there.
Well, if people have questions for you about what's in their own garden, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, Kinzler, @ndsu.edu.
And if possible, send a photo.
That's always great. Yeah, anytime there's an issue or something, or keep sending the photos of what's doing well in your yard
Yeah, let's
as
encourage
well.
people to send in more photos of what's doing well in your yard. Maybe we'll talk about those on the air.
Exactly. That gives a good snapshot of all the many good things we can grow in our area.
Because we're really coming into a time when about the next month, most people's yards will be kind of at their peak.
Yes, exactly. Lots of good photo opportunities, so do send them in. And thanks for listening.